Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm talking about a book that I am currently reading that is a chunker, and that's War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. I haven't really talked on my channel a whole lot about this book so far. I am past the halfway point as I am making this video, but hopefully by the time it is up, I am much farther along than that. If you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know that I love classics and that I also really love Russian classics. But despite my love for Russian classics, this is one that really scared me. And there are some things that I kind of wish I had known going into this book. So I kind of wanted to make like an introduction video. This is not going to be some analytical deep dive. This is not going to have a ton of history of the book. I am not as smart as the fellas over at the Codex Cantina, because they do these amazing like before you read videos that are just so good, so well researched, so thought-provoking and deep, and I just love it. They are planning to start a read through of this in March, so I will not be surprised if once they have finished they have a before you read War and Peace video as well. So this is kind of more of a like, I almost want to say like layperson because it's not going to be like super academic or deep in any way. It's just going to be things that like I wish I knew, because I am not, though I read a lot of classics, I'm not like this deep analytical person a lot of times when it comes to literature. I'm just not like a super smart cerebral person that just dives deep into these things. Though I really appreciate hearing thoughts of people who do, but I'm not someone who looks deep into symbolism a lot of times. I kind of take things a little bit more at face value. And even though I do love Russian classics, I have not read like a bajillion of them. I've read a couple Tolstoys. This is my third Tolstoy. I read Anna Karenina, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and now War and Peace. And then I've read 3 Dostoevskys, and also The Master and Margarita, which is actually like more of a modern classic, I think. But that's it. I have, as much as I love Russian literature, it's been kind of a newer discovery for me. So this is going to be not an expert view on things that you should expect or prepare yourself for before you start War and Peace. I'm actually gonna put this down because it's getting really heavy, because it's a hardcover and it's over 1,300 pages long. So first up, what can you expect when you're going into War and Peace? A lot of things. You can expect this sweeping epic that involves many different Russian families. So there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of military exploits that take place in this book, because, you know, when the title is War and Peace, you know you're going to be reading about war and also times of peace. You can expect some philosophical thinking, which is very common in Tolstoy's works and in Russian literature in general. You can also expect that wonderful level of Russian drama that just takes over so many Russian classic literature books. It makes it very entertaining to read parts of it. Some other aspects of this book are there's a lot of interwoven stories. So there are characters that might barely know each other from society or not really know each other at all, and their stories just become interwoven the more that we go on. The book is split up into like different volumes. Depending on your edition, it may say book, it may say volume, and then those are split up into parts, and then those parts are split up into chapters. So something that I really appreciated about this book is that the chapters are really short, like a couple of pages maybe. And so it made it feel like you're making more progress, even though maybe you just read 2 pages. You're like, I read a chapter, or I just read 4 chapters and it was only like, you know, 8 to 10 pages. So I really liked that, and it also gave me a lot of good stopping points. So if there was a point where I felt like I really needed to be focused, that was really helpful to be like, okay, I'm gonna read X amount of chapters and then I'm gonna stop. Because this is a book that, for me personally at least, required a lot more slowed down reading, because I really wanted to zero in on what was really happening and what was really being said. And I didn't want to miss any details that might become important later. So I have definitely read this book much more slowly than I anticipated or had hoped, but I'm okay with that because I feel like it's worth the investment of time and mental energy. But those short chapters help because they make you feel like you just made significant progress, and they give you lots of good stopping points. So talking historical background here, like, do you need to know anything historically going into this book? You don't have to, I don't think, because I didn't, but there are things that I wished that I had researched before I started this book. So despite the fact that I love Russian literature, I actually don't know a lot about Russian history in the time period that this book is set in. So it's set during the time where Napoleon's just basically taken over the world and he's trying to invade Russia. And so that's kind of the setting we have. The emperor or czar who is on the throne at the time is Alexander the First. And there's a lot of like battle scenes and strategic things that have to do with geographical locations and Russia's alliances as they're fighting against the French and stuff. And I wish I had done a little bit more research into the time period before diving in, just because I think I would have gotten more out of it. I still like understood what was happening, so you definitely don't have to do that. That is not a prerequisite for this, but I think that I might have just enjoyed it a little bit more. The nice thing about my book that I actually have the Oxford Classic edition, and they have like footnotes for different battles and people who are referenced, and so you can flip in the back and it's got a big appendix, and that was really helpful because it did explain some of the historical context. But when you're flipping back and forth in the middle of people's conversations, it also kind of like takes away from the flow of the story, which is why I wish I had done a little bit of research. The nice thing about my edition as well is it actually has like a list of historical dates in the beginning, so that is a good jumping off point if you're wanting to learn more about any of these battles or historical figures or whatever. They're all listed in this edition, and I think that a lot of other editions of War and Peace are the same. I'm sure that Penguin Classics does the same because they always do a really great job of making sure there's lots of lists and footnotes and all that kind of stuff. So speaking of editions, I am sure that there are many, many different translations of War and Peace, and I could probably like never keep up with them all. But there appear to be like three main translations that you tend to see. So the first translation is actually the translation that I have, and that is the Mod translation. It was translated by a husband and wife from Russian into English, and it was actually a translation that was approved of by Tolstoy, which is part of the reason that I was drawn to it. Since this is the Oxford edition, it has actually been recently updated, I think within like the last 10 years or so, by Amy Mandelker. Okay, not quite 10 years, 2010. So this is actually fairly recent in that. It does take the Mod translation, but Mandelker has come in and just revised and updated a few things. She does have something in the beginning where like an introduction where she probably talks about the things that she's changed, but I didn't want the story spoiled for me. So I haven't read that, and I hope to read that after I'm actually done with the book. Another very popular translator is Pavir and Volokonsky. They're like a duo who have done some more recent translations, and their works tend to feel, I feel like, a bit more modern in the way that like it's written, and it's not really archaic language or anything like that. So I feel like it's a very accessible translation, and a lot of people prefer their translations. So far, the only translations by them I have read are Anna Karenina, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and The Master and Margarita. So they've also translated a number of Dostoevsky's works, which I have not read any of their translations for Dostoevsky yet. Usually their translations are under the like label of vintage classics. So like I said, that this one right here is Oxford Classics, and usually theirs are labeled vintage classics. If I'm mentioning that because that might make it easier to find their translations. And the last translation that is pretty common is Anthony Briggs, and that's like all of Penguin's books have Anthony Briggs as a translator. I have heard some iffy things about his translations, but I know that there are some people who really love them. But I've heard, I think maybe it's his that actually doesn't have any French in it. I can't remember because there's a lot of French. It's a lot of French because the aristocracy in Russia at this time spoke mostly French. They obviously knew Russian, but the serfs spoke exclusively Russian. So I don't know if they felt like that made them sound fancier, more uppity to speak mostly French, but there's a lot of sections that are entirely in French, but in my edition, there is like a little asterisk, and then at the bottom of the page is the whole translation. So that's kind of nice. It made it not difficult at all. But I've heard, at least because I was originally looking at like the Penguin cloth bound editions are so pretty, and that was originally the edition I wanted to get. But then I was reading some of the reviews, and some of the people said that the ways that the soldiers talked almost seemed like it took place during like Victorian time period, and like it was almost like this Cockney kind of way that it was written. And so that was like kind of off-putting to me for this particular edition. I haven't read it, so I can't testify to whether or not that's actually true, but definitely do your research and see what it is that you are most interested in reading. Constance Garnett also has done a translation. I don't know how popular that is. I love her translations of Dostoevsky. In fact, all the Dostoevsky I've read so far has been her translation, and I really enjoy it. But the Modern Library Classics edition of War and Peace is translated by Constance Garnett. And that's an older translation as well. I think from the early 1900s, something like that. So it's definitely got like that older feel to it, which makes it more difficult to read for some people. So just keep in mind kind of the style of what you're looking for, and I really encourage you to either go to a bookstore or go to a library and just like flip through the different translations they have and read like the first page or two in each translation and see which one just kind of like jives with you the best in terms of the way that it's written, which one's most understandable for you, because the translation can make or break your experience of a foreign classic. And a lot of people can think that a book is really difficult or impossible to read, and really they're just reading a translation that just doesn't work for them. Okay, so let's talk troubleshooting. In other words, things that were kind of difficult for me in this that might be difficult for you too. So first of all, if you are new to Russian classics, I probably wouldn't recommend you to start with War and Peace anyway, but you may, and that's fine. Just be aware that in Russian culture, everyone has multiple names, so that can be really, really confusing. I feel like I have read enough Russian classics that it doesn't throw me off as bad as it used to, but the first couple that I read, I was just like, wait, who are we talking about now? Like it just switched around so much, and it made it really difficult for me. So a thing that's really helpful for that is kind of like writing down aliases as you come across it, which just goes into my next point, that there are so many characters in this book, like a sweeping amount of characters, and that's not uncommon in Russian literature either, but this is overwhelming. Honestly, I really, really struggled with this. And one thing that made it really handy is my book has, at the beginning of it, this right here, a list of principal characters. And it's nice because they actually have them grouped together according to families. So you got like the Bezukovs, the Rostovs, and I'm probably pronouncing those terribly because I haven't really studied up too much on Russian pronunciation. But that was really helpful. But in such a big book, flipping back and forth a lot, that's kind of annoying too. So something that's actually even more helpful than just referencing that list is to keep a list yourself. So you can just write a list, or you can like actually map out according to families, which is kind of labor intensive, but I think it will help you keep the characters straight and help you to remember who everyone is and who's related to who just a little bit better. But even if you don't actually like do mapping, just having a list, you could even print off a list from online. My one qualm sometimes is I'm worried if I look up a list, it's gonna be like, oh, this is so-and-so who's related to so-and-so, and he marries so-and-so and dies in this section. You're like, it's full of spoilers sometimes, so that can be kind of concerning. The list at the front of my book is not spoilery at all. Like it just says at the basically at the beginning of the book who they're related to and stuff. So it doesn't like give away marriages, because there's a lot of marriages that happen within this as well. And as far as I remember, it doesn't give away any deaths or anything like that either. So that was something that was really, really helpful to me. So if you're going into this, know that there is going to be an almost absurd amount of characters, so many, and then it's going to be really hard for you to keep them straight at first. But I encourage you to continue because it does get easier, and as the book progresses, we narrow in on like probably about 4 characters and then like the families around them, but those 4 characters are our main focus. this. And so it definitely gets easier. We narrow in as we go. Another thing, which I've kind of already alluded to, there's a lot of military strategy and battle scenes in this book, and they are tedious at times and were very difficult for me to get through. Some of them not so much, but especially towards the beginning of the book. So in book 1, the military scenes were really difficult for me to get through. This is actually my second attempt at reading War and Peace, and the first time that I read it, I DNF'd it in book 1 part 2 because the military scenes were just really difficult to get through, because they're talking about like the uniforms everyone's wearing and the formations everyone is in, and then you've got these side characters that they're like, and this person's doing this and this person's doing that, and those people, so far at least where I am, have not appeared in the book again. And so you're like unsure, like who's important, who isn't important, what's going on here. And then there's all the historical relevance surrounding it with Napoleon and Alexander the First and all this kind of stuff. So there's just a lot going on there, and you're still trying to adjust to these main characters and their families, and then some of them go off to war and some of them don't. So there's just a lot of skipping around and skipping between characters, and so it's very difficult to get through that portion, or at least it was for me. If you really like battle scenes, you really like military strategy, and you're familiar with this historical time period, you may not feel the same way. Actually, even if none of those things are true, you may still not feel that way. You may think that that's really interesting, but I really struggled with it. So the only thing that I can tell you is just to keep going, because that was just a section of the book that I just didn't like at all. But the further I got into the book, the more I liked it, the more we started getting back to civilian life again. And then again, we jump back into military scenes. But because we are so zeroed in the characters a bit more now, and we know the characters more now, we know who our main characters are, who important side characters are as well, like which ones are important, which ones aren't, it's a lot easier to follow. So when the military exploits pick up again in book 2, it's so much easier to follow, or at least I thought it was. It has been a very interesting reading experience. I've been reading it with Stephanie, who is over at Miss Richards Reads, and it's just been so fun to talk to her about like different things, because there are parts in this book that are like really funny, there are parts that are really fast paced, and then there are parts that are just like, oh my gosh, we're back to this again. And so it's just really helpful to have a buddy to read this with. It's really, really helpful to have accountability when you're reading a book like this. If you're reading it in a group, that really helps. If you're reading it by yourself, I feel like it's easier to DNF and maybe you don't get as much out of it. Whereas if 2 different people are reading it or more, different people can chime in and have things to say, and they might get things out of the book that you didn't, and you'd be like, wow, I never saw it that way before. So that's just one of the wonderful things about reading in community. So those are my thoughts so far on War and Peace and on beginning War and Peace and things that you might want to know going in. I hope that this doesn't sound discouraging at all, because I am kind of mentioning some things that are difficult about the book, but I find that if you can mentally prepare yourself for certain things being more difficult or different maybe than what you're used to reading, it actually can really set you up for success. If you're going in with a mindset of like, okay, it's going to be like this, but I'm going to keep track of the characters as best I can, and I'm going to push through when it's kind of slogging with the expectation that it's going to get better, because there is a reason why this book is so well loved and so well known and kind of like upheld as this masterpiece. And as I was reading the first part of the book, book 1, I was really struggling, but I'm like, I really feel like it's going to be worth it to me to push through. And I'm not even done with it, and I'm already feel like it was worth pushing through that first part that was really difficult for me. So I want to encourage you to do the same. That doesn't mean you have to like hate your way through it and just be like, oh, like if you're really hating it, you can DNF it, that's fine. But I just want to encourage you that if this is a book that is kind of like a bucket list book, or one that you've been interested in, or maybe even one that you want the bragging rights to be like, yeah, I read War and Peace. it's worth it to continue going on. So if you have read War and Peace or you're planning to, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you have read it, I would love it also if there are any things that helped you as you were reading it, that you can pop in the comments down below for anyone else who may be watching this and looking for some more helpful tips. I think that would be really helpful because, you know, sometimes you can watch these introduction videos to big intimidating classics and they can be either like all full of praise or all full of criticism or just be like a literary analysis. And that doesn't necessarily like help you get a big picture view on what to like really expect when you're diving in. So hopefully this video was helpful and not like redundant or anything, because I've never made a video like this before because it feels almost like presumptuous, like I know what I'm talking about, like I'm an expert. I am not an expert in Russian literature. And also, like, as I'm reading this, I've talked about it a little bit in reading wrap-ups, but I just realized like I don't want this big giant book that is taking so much of my time to like barely be represented on my channel. I wanted more videos to be able to share about War and Peace. I think that's all for this video, so thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.